Hi, Captain Peter Cutsie in South Korea, and this is my briefing room. Today we're going to cover the first in a three-part series of a non-normal checklist, namely the engine fire or engine severe damage or separation. The checklist today will be referring to and the briefing will be the engine fire portion. So one or more of these occur: engine fire warning, airframe vibrations with abnormal engine indications, or an engine separation. The auto throttle, if engaged, disengage. Thrust lever for the affected engine, confirm close. Engine start lever for the affected engine, confirm cutoff. Engine fire switch for the affected engine, confirm pull. The little note: to manually unlock the engine fire switch, press the override and pull. That shouldn't happen for the case of an engine fire, but if it did, you'd have to do it. It would happen in the case of, say, an engine severe damage when reading the checklist, and that's in the next briefing. If the engine fire switch, or this little word is super important, because unless your instructor has pointed it out to you, it's important that you understand that either the lights in the fire switch or the engine overheat light is illuminated. Both apply, or one or the other apply, or if both are on, they both apply. So you may not have the lights in the fire switch, but you would have or could have the engine overheat light on. So that's important. Engine fire switch, rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second, ensuring, of course, that the respective bottle discharge light comes on. And if after 30 seconds, the engine fire switch or engine overheat light stays illuminated, engine fire switch, rotate to the other stop and hold for 1 second. Those are the recall items, and they're done not before 400 feet above field elevation. Not before is an important statement. They're not done at 400. They're only done when you are safely under control, and the minimum 400 feet above field elevation. The actual checklist we're not going to get into here at this point, so we'll go and continue the briefing with a PowerPoint. The objective is to recognize an engine fire and take the appropriate actions. Glare shield, annunciator panel in front of both the captain and first officer will have a fire light, and of course the bell you would silence by pushing the fire light switch on the annunciator panel, and that's done by the pilot monitoring. The fire switch light will be illuminated, and or the engine overheat. That's what I was talking about. You may not have these lights, but you may have the engine overheat. All right, so that is how you recognize. Taking the appropriate actions, very important. Pilot flying, aviate. Fly the airplane. Pilot monitoring, cancel the fire bell warning light. And monitor the pilot flying. That's your job as pilot monitoring. Really, you should be called pilot flying in standby. When the airplane is under control and the gear has been retracted, a safe altitude has been attained, and that's a minimum of 400 feet, which I've discussed already. accomplish the recall actions. All right, let's go to an overview that perhaps you haven't seen in previous videos. I think in numbers and in colors to make things easy. And when you have an engine malfunction, or really any malfunction, but in this case, it's an engine malfunction. The type happens to be an engine fire. When you're close to the ground, in this case, it's right after V1. Think of three sectors, three layers to the cake: a red layer, an amber layer, a green layer, and a blue layer. All right, the red layer is close to the ground between liftoff and 400 feet above field elevation, not radio altitude. The amber is between 400 feet above field elevation to 800 feet above field elevation. That's your amber area. And then your green area is between 800 feet AFE and your MSA. And your blue area is your safe area within 25 nautical miles of your airport facility. So remember that, and as we're talking here, we'll go back and have a look at each one of those. And in this case, in the red area between field elevation, V1 liftoff, and the 400 feet above field elevation, fly the airplane, cancel the fire bell, and master caution as applicable. The duties I will look at shortly in this briefing. Pilot flying use rudder inputs to keep the airplane straight. That is the secret. And enough rudder, not too much, but enough rudder to keep the control wheel level the way you see it here. Okay. And your turn slip indicator, the secret, it's tiny, but it's the secret to being in control. Rotate at 2 to 3 degrees per second to 15 degrees of pitch. Remember, in this scenario, 2 engines are operating. So it's a normal liftoff, normal rotation. Once you're at 15 degrees of pitch, then look at the command bars and follow them. Track the extended center line of the runway using your nav display and your map. Use rudder trim when under control. Don't rush the rudder trim. Keep the rudder pressure there until you're a seasoned pilot. And then you'll be introducing rudder trim closer to the ground. All right? If you can do it, fine. But follow what your instructor teaches you. Your instructor will know your level of learning. Engage in autopilot when in-trimmed and comfortable. The pilot flying engages her or his own autopilot, not the pilot monitoring. Technique: engage autopilot B if you have a malfunction on engine number 1, and if your malfunction is on engine number 2, engage autopilot A. That is a technique. That's why it's in a grayed out. You follow your company SOPs. All right, let's go and have a look at the amber area, which is next. This is between 400 feet above field elevation and 800 feet. Fly the aircraft, track the center line, then call heading cell, identify. Those are basically the 2 calls, or straight ahead, engine out. If you are going to be following a company established engine out procedure in accordance with your SOPs, which is probably stored in route to whatever your SOPs state, then you will have to do an additional few things. That is to open the speed window and set the bank limit to 15 degrees. And that's in the grayed out area here because it may or may not be required. But if you're going to turn it, more than likely will be required. Follow your SOPs. All right. Then identify the malfunction. Now let's go back to in this case, let's say you've identified the malfunction. We've already had a look at it. And the fire today, it's an engine fire and it's on engine number 1. So we'll just go ahead with this overview. Then we'll go back to what you're going to do after you've identified the malfunction and you're above 400 feet. So the next area is the green area. This is where you're going to accelerate and clean up the airplane. And depending on the FMC update of whether it's less than 10.7 or greater than 10.7, then you will follow VNAV if it's greater than 10.7. All right, and VNAV should be armed. And that would have happened at 400 feet, and that would have been part of your observations, both pilots at that point. All right, once the flaps are up and the light is out, level change, and then MCT. And we'll look at that later. All right, that's the green area. Now let's go and have a look at the blue area before we go back to 400 feet. The blue area is your MSA or above, and remember to return the bank selector if you did select it. Return it at this point to auto, because if you're on vectors, you'll only get 15 degrees of bank for your turns. You want to navigate at this point, and if you're going to be staying in the area to return to land, you'll go to over the airport, ideally, or somewhere that you've been directed to by ATC close to the airport, or following an engine out procedure. That's part of your SOPs. So you do what your company have addressed you to do. We're going to go through this review soon when we get back to the review of everything from liftoff. So let's go to the main menu and let's go and have a look at the review. I've got it broken down on the screen to pilot flying and pilot monitoring. Pilot monitoring, engine fire, carrying out the cancellation, of course, of the fire light on the glare shield. That cancels the fire bell. Pilot flying, fly the airplane. Rotate normally. Remember, you've got both engines operating at this point. So 2 to 3 degrees per second to 15 degrees of pitch. So 1001, 1002 to a 5-second count, you should be at 5 degrees, I should say 15 degrees of pitch. Remember that on the 737, either the MAX or the NG, when you are rotating through 10 degrees, there's a dead band. You have to increase the back pressure to actually achieve that rate. So your instructor will point that out to you, that why did you stop at 10 degrees of pitch? And you'll say, well, I didn't stop, the airplane did. No, you have to know that you'll have to increase the back pressure in order to maintain a continuous rate. Okay, your instructor will tell you about that. Verify a positive rate of climb on the barometric altimeter. IVSI radio altimeter will move first, but the last one to move, more than likely, will be the baro altimeter. When the baro altimeter indicates a climb, then positive rate. Pilot flying after checking the positive rate of climb on the baro call gear up. Pilot monitoring, place the landing gear lever to the up position. When the gear lights are extinguished, move the landing gear lever to the off position. That's on the NG only. The MAX only has 2 positions, up and down, I should say. So on the MAX, you leave the landing gear lever up. That should be part of your briefing if you're flying both the NG and the MAX, by the way, your takeoff briefing. Track the extended center line on the nav display. All right, there it is. You're a strong crosswind from the right, 90 degrees, but you're right on track. because you're putting the track line, which is generated from the IRS, that white solid line, you're placing it over the runway extended center line, the dashed white line, which extends for 14.2 nautical miles. If you fly the actual track over the runway extended center line, regardless of the wind, you'll track the center line. This procedure after takeoff works beautifully, also works wonderfully for a raw data ILS approach. At 400 feet is when really we start talking as a crew, and that's 400 feet minimum. If the airplane is not under control, don't start talking. All right, pilot flying call, heading cell and identify, two things. The other items you have to ensure, and the bank limit as required. Identifying, so CAP or the pilot flying says identify, the pilot monitoring, engine fire number 1. Pilot flying will disengage the auto throttle and with their hand on the respective thrust lever. Engine number 1 thrust lever, confirm. Pilot monitoring, confirm. Number 1. And pilot flying engine number 1 thrust lever, slowly retard until it's closed. Pilot monitoring, watch the pilot fly. You are really the pilot flying in standby. You place, pilot monitoring places hand on number 1 engine start lever and says, engine number 1 start lever. The pilot flying confirms the selection is correct and says, confirm number 1. The pilot monitoring selects the respective start lever to cut off, saying, cut off. Pilot monitoring then places her or his hand on the number 1 engine fire switch and says, engine number 1 fire switch. Pilot flying confirms the selection is correct and says, confirm number 1. A little note here, pilot monitoring, don't put your hand over the fire switch lights. The pilot flying has to see that the lights are on. Place your hand under, fingers under the switch. When the pilot flying confirms, then grasp the fire switch before pulling. Pull and say pull. If the engine fire switch or engine overheat, remember that little or I was talking about, this is so important. One or the other is illuminated, engine fire switch, rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second and check the associated bottle discharge light, illuminated. It may take a second or 2. And if it's not illuminated, you're going to have to go to the other bottle at this time. Don't rush it. Take a 30-second count. And then if the light's on the fire switch or the overheat light is still on, rotate to the other bottle. Keep the pilot flying informed of the status of the lights. At 800 feet, we're now in the green area. Clean up the aircraft. If you're U-10.7 or greater, you should be in VNAV and the command bar should pitch down and follow them. If they don't, call for open the speed window, set flaps up speed. Normally, the pilot flying makes all selections if the autopilot's engaged. If you're a seasoned pilot, you more than likely will have the autopilot engaged by this point, but please don't rush it. Be comfortable before you engage an autopilot. Pilot flying engages their own autopilot. Now, once the autopilot is engaged, and if you feel comfortable, make your own selections on the MCP. By that, I mean, if you're struggling to track the center line or struggling to fly the airplane and the autopilot's engaged, please don't lose your focus of flying the airplane by looking up to the MCP and making a selection because your company manual says you will make MCP if you're the pilot flying. Use your head. That's called airmanship. Big word. Covers a lot about aviation. All right. Okay. So you're still in the aviate mode. When the flaps are fully retracted and the light is out, flaps up, light out, level change, MCT. Pilot flying calls for that. Pilot monitoring gives the pilot flying what she or he requests. If you can't come back to the airport and you're going en route, pilot flying call for the engine out climb page. Climb at the engine out speed and climb to an engine out altitude, which your pilot monitoring would have received from ATC. Some companies have engine out procedures already in the database, and selecting them in the fashion that you were taught follow your company procedures. They may be en route 2, they may not. But in any case, follow your SOPs. If you're coming back to land, try to hold over the airport. If there's no VOR, you've got an FMC, use it. Hold over the airport. Why? Because you're a 2-engine airplane and you're on 1 engine. Where do you want to be? You don't want to be on vectors at 4,000 feet, 25 miles from the airport, if you should lose the other engine. So use your head, go and hold over the airport, or follow your company SOPs. All right. Remember to return the bank selector to auto when you're in the blue sector. That is, when you're above and you're cleaned up and you're in MSA. Because if you're going to be given radar vectors, the aircraft will only turn with 15 degrees of bank. Okay. Remember, for the sake of this briefing, let's say you're coming back. So once you're en route to a holding, do a quick review of the actions, a quick DODAR, which means, hey, what did we have? An engine fire? Did we have memory items? Yes. Did we do them? Yes. All right. Maybe you didn't do them. All right. Now you can have a holding pattern set up. Pilot flying, ask the pilot monitoring to do so. You're navigating. And once that is done, enter the holding pattern and then do the first checklist. Somewhere in this area, you would have communicated to ATC. And if you noticed down here in the communicate area, I say use airmanship of when and what to say to ATC. If you're breaking the SID in a turn between 400 feet and 800 feet, you have to tell them something. Make it brief. So really use your head on this and listen to what the captain has asked you to do, either a Mayday or a PAN. A PAN may be upgraded to a Mayday later or downgraded from a Mayday to a PAN. That's up to the captain. That's her or his decision. All right. You do the first non-normal checklist. In this case, the call is checklist, engine fire or engine severe damage or separation. That's the call. Once the first non-normal checklist is completed, do the after takeoff check. Then proceed to complete any other non-normal checklists. There will be when we do severe damage later and separation. The last non-normal checklist you will call for is a 1-engine inoperative landing checklist. It's last because maybe you're not holding over the airport, maybe you're en route, and you could be an hour en route, so you're not going to get involved in doing that 1-engine inoperative landing checklist until you are ready for descent at your next airport. Remember, in the communicate portion of all this, you have 3 different facilities or people that you're going to communicate with. You're going to communicate with ATC first. You're going to communicate with your in-charge flight attendant, and then you're going to communicate with your company. Generally, that's the format. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this briefing. This PowerPoint is in the package for you to look at. The information is on the screen if you want to subscribe to me. I will be doing the next briefing on engine severe damage. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.